So there you go. It was supposed to settle everything down. Well, since then we've had an MP arrested, we've had 2 cabinet ministers resign, and last night we even had a vice president of the Labor Party talk about the party's crisis of confidence, that it needs cultural change. So a very, very dramatic few days, and the Prime Minister's announcement has clearly not settled things down. So to talk about that and all the implications of what's unfolded this week, I've joined by regular guest, Labor Senator and former New South Wales State Secretary, Senator Matt Thistlethwaite. Thanks for joining us, Matt.
Pleasure, Chris.
And also from Melbourne, Liberal MP Josh Frydenberg. Thanks for joining us, Josh.
Good morning, Chris. Good morning, Matt.
Morning, Josh.
Now, I'm going to come to you first, Matt. All through last year, you would turn up here on Saturday Agenda and often walk into a political problem for the government and take it on the chin and talk your way through it and argue the case. Now, you've turned up here again for the first program of this year, and your party, your government, is facing another crisis-ridden weekend. 2 senior ministers resigning from Cabinet. Why?
Well, at this point in time, Chris, it's still media speculation. It hasn't been confirmed, and I understand that the Prime Minister will hold a media conference in Canberra later this morning. So I think we should just wait and see what the reasons behind the particular resignations are, and I'm not going to try and guess if there is particular reasons behind them. But I would say that, look, over the last couple of weeks I've been spending a lot of time in the bush, talking to constituents, particularly that have been damaged, had their houses and livelihoods damaged by the fires. We've seen what's been going on in Queensland with the floods over the last week. We've really just been getting on with the job of governing, and this week the Prime Minister announced that there'll be disaster assistance payments for those people. We've announced tax deductibility of donations. We're just getting on with the business of governing, and that's what we have to do.
This is the problem, is you're telling us you're getting on with the business of government. The Prime Minister's telling us she's getting on with the business of government. She made this speech and announcement during the week saying she wanted to create certainty and lock everything down and get on with governing. And since then we've had the former Labor MP, current independent Craig Thompson, arrested. And you've got these 2 dramatic cabinet resignations. Also Tony Sheldon last night, the Vice President nationally of the ALP, saying that the party is in crisis and needs cultural change.
Look, they're matters that are happening outside of the Parliament. I can't comment on those. People have got their reasons for those issues. But we're getting on with the business of providing a better future for families in this country. And I point to what we've announced over the last week to assist families in rural and regional New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania, and indeed in Queensland. Contrast that with what Tony Abbott announced for families this week in his National Press Club speech. Can I just emphasise it? He's saying that he's going to get rid of the school kids bonus and the low-income superannuation contribution.
I promise you, we'll talk about that later, but let's stick on these resignations. Are there any leadership rumblings at present in the Labor Party? I keep hearing that some of the Julia Gillard supporters are defecting across to Kevin Rudd as we speak.
No, not at all. This matter was decided last year by the caucus. Kevin Rudd has indicated that he's not interested in challenging for the role. And I think
if the Prime Minister set up her week to establish certainty and to try and focus the party on September the 14th, then why would 2 of her cabinet ministers resign within days of that? Why wouldn't she have at least got those announcements out of the way before she tried to establish all this certainty?
Well, at this point in time, Chris, it is still speculation, and I'm not going to guess the reasons behind any particular reasons that those cabinet ministers may make for any speculative resignations. But we're just getting on with the job. We're doing what we're elected to do, and that's govern for families in this country. And in this week there's a stark contrast. And credit to the Prime Minister for announcing the election date, because put aside all the fanfare about it and who knew and the stories in the media, the surprise and all that, what it's really about this coming year is which party offers the better alternative for the people of Australia and who has the better plan.
You don't think it's wishful thinking? You don't think it's wishful thinking on the Prime Minister's part? She wants to be able to announce an election on September the 14th, but she announced it now to try and lock the party in behind her to make sure that she doesn't face any leadership problems over the next couple of months?
By announcing the date for the election, the Prime Minister is clearly saying to the people of Australia that the focus of this year should be on policy and the differences between the parties and who offers the better plan for families and the people of Australia.
We'll come back to that.
I'm confident that we do when we get into the policy nuts and bolts.
Yes, well, if the government stops with the resignations and the arrested backbenchers and the like, then we can get on to policy. We'll come back to some more of that in a moment, Matt, but I don't want to forget Josh Frydenberg in Melbourne. Josh, I thought it was interesting when the Prime Minister announced the election date, her chosen date of September the 14th, that Tony Abbott didn't come out then and say, well, I'm ready, let's have an election now. He instead wanted to just hold back, restrain himself and say that he's ready to fight the election on September the 14th. Now, you've got these resignations, there's other turmoil in the government. Why isn't the Liberal Party any longer pushing for an election now?
Well, look, Chris, the date's been set. We would be ready for an election now. Policies have been costed, they've been funded, and they've been prepared. So we are ready to introduce a mature and capable government once more to Australia. But to use a pun here, Chris, the Labor government is rudderless. What we've seen over the last 24 hours is just a sheer soap opera, and Australians deserve better than have to view this B-grade script unfold. I mean, you started to recount what has actually taken place here. I mean, Tony Sheldon didn't just whack his Labor colleagues, he called them cockroaches. This is a Vice President of the Labor Party accusing his fellow Labor colleagues of being cockroaches. And when the Prime Minister called the election date for 225 days away, she didn't even consult her own cabinet. No wonder half of them are starting to resign at the moment. I mean, she consulted independents, Rob Oakeshott and Tony Windsor, and even the Greens, but did not consult her own cabinet. That must be the first time ever in Australia's history. You mentioned Craig Thomson. I mean, the thing about Craig Thomson and his 149 charges that he will be facing before the courts is that this illustrates the Prime Minister's lack of judgment, because she backed him year upon year upon year, and she accepted his vote on the floor of the Parliament. And then you've got the ICAC stuff.
Josh Frydenberg, it is too easy on a day like this for you to sit there and take free kicks at the government.
Sure.
We know there are questions the government needs to answer today. I want to get back to this point, though. You, as an opposition, have spent most of the past 2 years trying to force an early election. Even as all this unfolds this week, you've backed off on that. You're happy to wait for September the 14th. This seems to demonstrate that Tony Abbott is giving into the pressure, or is admitting that a lot of the attack on him is working, that he's seen as too negative, and he doesn't want to push for an election anymore. He wants to sit back and just allow events to unfold.
I don't accept the premise of that at all, Chris. I mean, I think you're reading way too much into it. I think we'd be ready for an election tomorrow, and we've been saying that for some time. The Prime Minister has set the date, and that's her prerogative, and she set it for 225 days away. So we will prepare for that election date, namely September the 14th. But like I said, we've been working. I mean, Andrew Robb and Tony Smith and a whole lot of my colleagues have been working, and Greg Hunt have been working on the Policy Development Committee, and they have a whole suite of policies that are ready to be rolled out and costed and funded.
Well, why didn't Abbott announce them the other day?
Well, we have actually. I mean, if you actually go through our Real Solutions document, there is billions of dollars for new infrastructure projects, including the East-West Link in my own state of Victoria. We're going to reintroduce the ABCC, the Australian Building and Construction Commission, because there's been lawlessness in that most important sector. We're going to have a proper paid parental leave scheme. You know, we're going to have a green army, and you can go on and on and on. A reverse Colombo plan. We're going to get young people speaking foreign languages, etc.
Josh Frydenberg, we will hear from the Prime Minister later today with a mini reshuffle, a substantial reshuffle,
Sure.
really, when you're talking about it, replacing 2 cabinet ministers. Isn't it time then for Tony Abbott to have a reshuffle to match that? And wouldn't you expect that he should do that and should promote some of his up-and-comers into the cabinet, get some of his better performers into the shadow cabinet, Arthur Sinodinos, for instance?
Look, I think our front bench is doing a wonderful job, and Tony Abbott's made very clear that they should all expect to be front benchers in government. So that's his decision, and, you know, there's full confidence of the team.
That was before we've had these resignations from the government, from the cabinet, so surely Tony Abbott will now have to readjust his front bench team. It'll be a perfect opportunity for people like yourself to put your hands up for a front bench spot.
I think you know enough about politics, Chris, that backbenchers don't put their hands up. They're only asked, and if they're
Not
asked
in
to be
public,
the
at
boot,
least.
if they're asked to be the boot studder in the team, they accept to be the boot studder. They will do anything if they're asked by the leader, and that's his prerogative. Look, the fact is, Tony Abbott is leading from the front, and he has the full confidence of our team, and he's got a fantastic team behind him, namely in the shadow cabinet and in the shadow ministry. So I don't expect a reshuffle. I think we'll take that team into the election, and I think we'll win the election. And by God, do Australians deserve a better government than they've got at the moment.
Well, we're going to take a break, but we'll be back after the break with Josh Frydenberg and Matt Thistlethwaite, and they'll go head-to-head over what the Prime Minister and the alternative Prime Minister had to say in their big speeches at the National Press Club this week. Welcome back to Saturday Agenda, and just if you're tuning in just now, catching up with the news that overnight we've learned that two cabinet ministers are expected to resign today. The Higher Education Minister, Senator Chris Evans, and the Attorney General, Nicola Roxon. Prime Minister Julia Gillard is expected to call a press conference in Canberra later this morning. Sky News will be across all of that as she has to announce these resignations and, of course, new appointments to the Cabinet. So the government clearly in crisis here, just 3 or 4 days after the Prime Minister announced that she'd like to have the election on September the 14th. We've also had overnight some pretty stunning comments from the National Vice President of the ALP, Tony Sheldon, and of course there's the Craig Thompson matter proceeding before the court. So plenty happening here in the first few weeks of a long election year. And I'm joined from Melbourne by Liberal backbencher Josh Frydenberg, and on the desk here with me is Labor Senator Matt Thistlethwaite. And we want to go back to those big speeches, the set-piece speeches this week at the National Press Club. Both the Prime Minister and Tony Abbott supposed to set out their vision for the year, Matt. Now, the key thing the Prime Minister wanted to do was establish certainty. Has it worked at all? Can you see any glimmer of hope, any good that's come out of this big push for certainty on Wednesday?
Well, the Prime Minister clearly enunciated what Labor's plans for the future of our country are, and they're focused around families, delivering a better education system through the Gonski reforms, delivering a national disability insurance scheme, on top of what we've done already in government in the carbon price, ensuring that we have a future for our environment, but at the same time supporting families to make that transition.
She wanted to frame the election year, but she didn't want to start an election campaign as such. Here's what she had to say.
Relax, relax, relax. This is not day one of the election campaign. The writs will be issued on the 12th of August. That's the first day of the election campaign. For now, these are the days of governing.
Gee, it feels a hell of a lot like a long election campaign, Matt. Of course, you and many others in the caucus and the cabinet were not consulted about choosing the date. Has it worked? Has that tactic worked in terms of settling things down at all?
Well, it's the Prime Minister's prerogative to choose the date for an election, and she's exercised that right. I think it will work because, as I said earlier, it's about establishing the focus on policy and the clear differences between the two parties and who's got the better plan. Now, this week we saw a focus on families, Labor delivering for families affected by floods and fires. In contrast, Tony Abbott came out and gave families a big whack by indicating that he's going to remove the low-income superannuation contribution, which helps support low-income workers in this country, most of whom are women, by providing them with a $500 tax cut on their superannuation.
He also said he'd scrap the school kids bonus.
But that's 3.6 million workers in this country who face a tax increase under an Abbott government. He also said he'd get rid of the school kids bonus. That's vital support for education and funding education for families. That's a big kick in the guts to families. And in the contrast, we've seen what we've done this week supporting families in some of those ravaged areas of Australia. That's the contrast.
Josh Frydenberg, of course, Tony Abbott did announce those cuts, but that's what he has to do, doesn't he? Announce cuts, inflict some pain, and hope that that will establish some economic credibility, but still allow him to get elected.
Look, Chris, absolutely. This government's not only living on borrowed time, it's been living on borrowed money, and we've seen Australia's debt go up and up and up. And that debt not only needs to be paid, but the interest bill on that debt needs to be paid. So it's okay for Matt to say, well, you know, people should be getting this handout and that handout. But at the end of the day, it's the Australian taxpayers who have to pay for it. When it comes to the school kids bonus, we're interested in real education outcomes. And the Prime Minister said that, you know, education was going to be her legacy. Let's not forget, over the last 5 years, she's been the Education Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister and the Prime Minister. And in that time, we've seen outcomes in education for our school kids go backwards, and to go backwards compared to their international counterparts.
Talking about
and
cuts,
so
Josh Frydenberg, though, you're going to have to announce even more cuts, obviously, as you say, if you're going to get the budget back into shape, if you're going to back up the rhetoric with the numbers that underpin it. And Tony Abbott's had a bit to say about that during the week as well. Have a look.
The government thinks that by announcing September the 14th as polling day, it can force the coalition to release all our policy detail now. I say to them, the coalition will release our costings after the government releases theirs, after the budget and before polling day.
Well, there you go, Josh Frydenberg. There is a lot of pressure on the opposition to reveal more of the costings. Will you announce any more cuts, other than those you've announced this week? Will the opposition announce more cuts before the budget?
Look, you leave that to Joe Hockey and to Tony Abbott. At the end of the day, as they say, we need to know what actually the budget figures are, because this government produced a $30 billion blowout in their last budget. They promised, you know, a $12 billion budget deficit, and it was, I think, $42 billion. So at the end of the day, they can't be trusted on the numbers. But we will live within our means. That's why we're going to welcome back to Australia mature and capable government. This government doesn't care about balancing the books. We do. And Tony Abbott's an heir to the John Howard legacy. And when he came into power in 1996, there was this huge budget, blowouts and deficits, and he paid all that debt back and left some in the bank when he was out of office.
Thanks for that history, Josh Frydenberg.
We know there are cuts coming because it was leaked from Shadow Cabinet.
We know there are.
$70 billion worth of cuts. And I noticed, Chris, this week that they wouldn't confirm that they will keep the childcare rebate at the level it's at, because they can't promise to.
We are running out of time. Very quickly, one word, yes or no. Will you be elevated in the cabinet reshuffle that announced later this morning?
Well, I agree with Josh. These are decisions for the Prime Minister.
Well, let's hope so. Thanks both of you. Josh Frydenberg in Melbourne and Matt Thistlethwaite here in the studio with me. Thanks for joining us on what's been a pretty dramatic morning. Now, stick with us on Sky News throughout the day. I'll be back at 1:30 with another edition of Saturday Agenda, where we'll update all the developments from Canberra today. See you then.